words, in 1,093 categories, we have more examples of competitive small business than large business. So what are the 7 categories that are really hard to localize? Number 1 on the list is running your own centralized monetary system. I know a lot of you really do want to do that, so I'm not saying it's off the table. But number 2, running your own nuclear power plant. Okay, we can concede that one. Number 3 is missiles and rockets. And surely, if there was a category that would be hard to localize, it would be one with an intergalactic mission. And yet, there are 10 of these businesses in the United States, and 3 are small and locally owned. So that one is open to you. My real point here is that economists are really cavalier about this concept of economies of scale, as if you go up on, Mount Economus and pull down the word from the Lord and it says, "Thou shalt not do small-scale local manufacturing." It doesn't work like that. And the smart economic developer in a small state like this looks for the brilliant examples of small-scale success in every one of these sectors. And that's how you build a brilliant, diversified, successful economy. There's a bunch of other trends that are favoring local business. We don't have time to get into them, but just to mention a few of them. As oil prices get more expensive, shipping prices go up, that's going to push us toward localization. We naturally have been shifting in this country from goods to services. Today, the typical household spends 2/3 of its budget on services. A generation ago, 2/3 was on goods. Those of you who are in love with manufacturing complain about this, but at the end of the day, it's great news for local economies because services are an inherently local activity. Yeah, there's a little bit of internet niche-y stuff that happens, but services is one area where we have run a surplus nationally for the last 10 years. The internet economy allows a growing number of people to do almost anything from their homes. That's a big difference to a rural economy like Vermont. There's a greater premium on trust. The importation of deadly dog food from China or mad cows from Canada has really driven a lot of our interest in local food. Even homeland security, at the end of the day, is about creating resilient local supplies of basic necessities. So let's turn to the second part of what I wanted to share with you, which is that if we can concede that local living economies are what the focus of economic development should be, what then ought we be doing in economic development to support local living economies? Is summarized in 6 P's: planning, people, partners, purse, by which I mean investment, purchasing, and policy making. And in each of the categories, there would require a little bit of a change in what you're doing right now. So leakage analysis means you would seriously examine, consistent with the quote that was read before I started talking, all of the places you are unnecessarily importing outside goods and services and identify opportunities for local business import substitution. People. We would focus entrepreneurship programs laser-like on local business and try, and this is the partnership piece, to put those businesses together in networks like VBSR, like them in local business? 1, 2. You might be wrong, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt here. How many of you wish you had your pension funds in local business? Yeah. Now, this is kind of a perversity. Half of the economy is local small business. Half of things that are making significant profit in the economy are local small business, and none of our pension money is going into those businesses. This is what an economist might dryly observe is a market failure. And this failure comes from securities laws that were enacted in the early Jurassic period that make it extremely expensive, except for lawyers, for small investors to place small bits of money in small businesses. And that's clearly something we need to change here. Purchasing. How do we get people to think local first? And I'll say more about that in a second. Policy making. I have a really simple policy objective that I would encourage the Vermont legislature to think about. Stop destroying local business. Simply enacting a level playing field between local and non-local businesses would be a home run and a sea change from what you're doing right now. So I want to give you one example of each of these things, just to give you a sense of the richness of this agenda. So, leakages. We live in a country with about 33,000 municipalities and other jurisdictions, and remarkably, I've only been able to find 10 comprehensive leakage analyses that have been done, and I did 5 of them. So, there is a need for some serious analysis. Fortunately, one of the other 5, was done by a Vermonter in the year 2000, looking at some of the bigger leakages in the state. It's an excellent piece of work, especially given what the state of the data were then. And what he found, looking at this chart from right to left, every year in this largely agrarian state, there's $2 billion of food that you're importing. Looking at the middle bar, in a state rich with solar, wind power, biofuel potential, you're importing something like $1 billion worth of energy a year. The smallest number on the left is interest that Vermonters pay on credit cards coming from out-of-state banks. That's $250 million a year. What a leakage analysis begins to tell you is, starting from right to left, these are the big things that we can start systematically plugging the leaks in. These are the things that will have gigantic multiplier impacts once we start doing the import substitution. Now, before I get into the next bunch of things,